Rich Dad, Poor Dad. A quick book summary. Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad was first published in 1997 and quickly became a must-read for people interested in investing, money, and the global economy. The book has been translated into dozens of languages, sold around the world, and has become the one personal finance book of all time. The overarching theme of Rich Dad, Poor Dad is how to use money as a tool for wealth development. Robert Kiyosaki, author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, had two main influential fathers in his life. Poor Dad was Kiyosaki's biological father, a man who was highly intelligent and very well educated. Poor Dad believed in studying hard and getting good grades, then finding a well-paying job. Yet, despite these seemingly positive attributes, Poor Dad didn't do well financially. Rich Dad was the father of Kiyosaki's best friend. He had a similar work ethic to Kiyosaki's real dad, but with a twist. Rich Dad believed in financial education, learning how money works, and understanding how to make money work for you. Although he was an 8th grade dropout, Rich Dad eventually became a millionaire by putting the power of money to work for him. The book is written from Kiyosaki's perspective of how Rich Dad went about making money and the mistakes that Poor Dad made. The first 6 chapters of Rich Dad, Poor Dad make up about 2/3 of the book and discuss the 6 lessons that Kiyosaki learned from his rich dad. Chapter 1. The Rich Don't Work for Money. Instead of reading the chapter title as The Rich Don't Work for Money, what Kiyosaki means to say is that the rich don't work for money. The truth is that the majority of rich people do work very hard, but they go about it differently than most people do. Rich people and people who want to become rich work and learn every day how to put money to work for them. As Rich Dad says, the poor and middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. Kiyosaki also notes that having a regular job is just a short-term solution to the long-term problem or challenge of creating wealth and financial freedom. Chapter 2. Why Teach Financial Literacy? The second chapter of Rich Dad, Poor Dad explains the difference between an asset and a liability. Chapter 2 drives home the point that it's not about how much money you make, but about how much money you keep. An asset is something that has value, that produces income or appreciates, and has a market where the asset can easily be bought and sold. Conversely, liabilities take money out of your pocket because of the costs associated with them. As Kiyosaki writes in Chapter 2 of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, want to grow rich? Concentrate your efforts on buying income-producing assets when you truly understand what an asset is. Keep liabilities and expenses low. Chapter 3. Mind Your Own Business. There are 2 key messages in this chapter. First, pay off your debts and start investing in income-producing assets as soon as possible. Next, stay financially healthy by spending your time instead of your paycheck and investing as much of your money as possible in assets. Kiyosaki notes in Chapter 3 of Rich Dad, Poor Dad that most people confuse their profession with their business. In other words, they spend their entire lives working in somebody else's business and making other people rich. One of my favorite quotes from this section is, "The primary reason the majority of the poor and middle class are fiscally conservative is that they have no financial foundation. They have to cling to their jobs and play it safe. They can't afford to take risks." Chapter 4. The History of Taxes and the Power of Corporations. When reading this chapter, it's important to keep in mind that Kiyosaki wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad as a motivational book, not to provide expert financial or tax advice. The rich understand the power of company structures and the tax code and use every legal means they can to minimize their tax burden. Chapter 4 of the book also covers the 4 main components of what Kiyosaki calls financial IQ: accounting, investment strategy, market law, and law. As Rich Dad, Poor Dad reminds us, understanding the legal and tax advantages significantly contribute to building long-term wealth. For instance, a corporation can pay expenses before paying taxes, whereas an employee gets taxed first and must try to pay expenses on what is left. Corporations also offer legal protection from lawsuits. When someone sues a wealthy individual, they are often met with layers of legal protection and often find that the wealthy person actually owns nothing in their own name. Chapter 5. The Rich Invent Money. Inventing money means finding opportunities or deals that other people don't have the skill, knowledge, resources, or contacts for. In Chapter 5, Rich Dad, Poor Dad explains there are two types of investors. Investment packages are bought by people who entrust their money to a developer or fund manager. This is the way that most people invest, such as buying shares of an ETF or putting money into a real estate crowdfunding venture. Professional investors look after their own investments, research the market to find deals that make sense, then hire professionals to manage the daily oversight. Chapter 6. Work to learn, don't work for money. Poor Dad was intelligent and well-educated and worked for money because job security meant everything to him. Rich Dad became a millionaire by working to learn. As Kiyosaki writes, "I recommend to young people to seek work for what they will learn, more than what they will earn. Look down the road at what skills they want to acquire before choosing a specific profession and before getting trapped in the rat race." In fact, that's exactly what Kiyosaki did. He joined the Marines after graduating from college and learned the essential business skills of leading and managing people. After serving his country, Kiyosaki joined Xerox, overcame his fear of rejection to become one of the top 5 salespeople in the company, then left the corporate world to form his own business. Chapter 6 of Rich Dad, Poor Dad then discusses the synergy of management skills needed for success in business. Cash flow management, systems management, people management. Chapter 7 of Rich Dad, Poor Dad begins by noting that the primary difference between a rich person and a poor person is how they manage fear. Robert Kiyosaki isn't talking about the type of fear that some people have when going to the dentist or watching The Exorcist. In the book, Fear is about the fear of losing money and how to handle that fear. It's one of the 5 biggest obstacles people face on the path to becoming financially independent. Fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, arrogance. These roadblocks and the failure to overcome them are why people who have studied and achieved financial literacy are still unable to develop assets that generate plentiful amounts of cash flow. In Chapter 8, Rich Dad, Poor Dad tells us that there is gold everywhere. Most people are not trained to see it. Part of this lack of vision and clarity comes from the world we live in. We're trained from a very young age to work hard for someone else, spend the money that we earn, and borrow more if we run short. Unfortunately, people who choose to become one of the masses never take the time to develop their financial genius. Investing in real estate is the perfect example. The average person can spend a week out in the field and find nothing, while the investor who has trained himself can easily find 4 or 5 deals that make sense in a single day. In the final section of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Chapter 9, Kiyosaki pulls the key lessons of the book together into a checklist of actions you can start taking today. Stop doing what you're doing by taking a break and assessing what is and isn't working. Look for new ideas by finding resources on different and unique subjects. Find a mentor who's been where you're going, take them to lunch, and pick their brain. Always be learning by taking classes, attending seminars, and reading. Spend 10 minutes each month for the next 12 months walking, running, or driving a certain area and looking for changes that create bargains. Shop for real estate deals when the market corrects because profits are made when buying, not when selling. Is Rich Dad, Poor Dad worth reading? The goal of Rich Dad, Poor Dad is to motivate you to develop your own unique path to financial freedom. While the book doesn't take a one-size-fits-all approach with ready-made answers, it does provide an excellent framework for creating your own objectives to build wealth by investing in real estate.